Hi, Sarah. I would like to welcome you to our conversation on building community in virtual online teaching. Dr. Sarah Bogue is the Assistant Professor of the Practice of the History of Christianity and Director of Digital Learning at Candler School of Theology at Emory University. We have been talking about the difficulty of maintaining community in online teaching because we all experience this Zoom fatigue. Several of us have been on Zoom meetings several times during the day. So do you have tips or what are some of the suggestions for faculty who are facing that problem?
Absolutely. I think my number one suggestion, and this is for faculty themselves as much as it is for faculty in relationship to their students, is to make space for what people are carrying right now, not just Zoom fatigue, but anxiety and stress. I think that would be true in all the best pedagogical spaces, not just in COVID ones, but it's even more important in COVID times. And I think there are a couple concrete things faculty can do to make that space for students. One is to give time before and after class in the Zoom room for students to be there and just drop in. I think some of our faculty at Candler have had really, really great times by rebranding office hours as just a drop-in coffee time. So students don't feel like they need to come with a specific question, and they can come in groups, they can come one-on-one. It just gives them a space to really decompress and engage with what they're dealing with, in addition to asking questions, concrete questions about the class. I also think that it's really important when you open classrooms to give people an opening exercise. I know a lot of faculty already do this when they open Zoom classes, but one that I found is really helpful is to have a scale of silly things. My favorite is a scale of cats, and it's pictures of 9 cats. And I say, on a scale of cats, how are you feeling today? And each of the cats has a funny expression on it. And it's a way of inviting engagement as well as sort of emotional engagement at the level that students are comfortable with. One of the things our students have said in the past is that sometimes teachers' well-intentioned invitation to share personal things has not made them feel comfortable. It's made them shut down. So the answer to this is not to have every assignment ask students to share how they're feeling. That just adds more stress, but to give a little bit of a release valve at the beginning of each class. How are you feeling on a scale of cats? And if they pick the really distressed looking cat, you can follow up with them later, but it's not that students have to out themselves as being under a great deal of stress. So I think making space for that in intentional ways can be really helpful, even inside the Zoom space, which is not really what you asked, but I do think it's an important thing. I also would really advise, I don't know if all of our faculty know about sharing music on Zoom. There's an option in Zoom to share just the computer sound, and having that playing when students come into class. I know a lot of faculty did that in in-person classes, just changes the whole tone of the space and invites students into just a different kind of feeling when they enter the Zoom space, just like they do in the regular classroom space. So that's some just overall tips I had at the beginning. What do you think about those, Pui Lan?
I think it's great to have the music. I have not thought about it.
Oh, yeah. Some of our faculty here made that a sort of a big part of their pedagogy, and were very concerned when they went to the online space that wouldn't be possible. But it allows just kind of, it sets a tone that I think people are anxious they didn't know a way to set in Zoom.
May I ask you, Sarah,
Yeah.
for the scale of cat exercise, is that visible to students who is picking which cat?
Yes. So what I do is I say, I shared the image, and then in the chat, they type what number it is. And they can add explanation if they want, but they don't have to add any explanation. And it's sort of a similar model that I use for weekly or at least 2 or 3 times a semester check-ins with students that are usually anonymous, but in this case, because it's weekly and it's fun, it's a little bit less intense for the students. But and then they follow up if they would like by private chat, and I always tell them they're open to do that in Zoom.
I also do that casual drop-in office hour thing. So I told my students I would always begin my class 15 minutes early, and I would stay on 15 minutes after the class. But it is interesting that I observed the first time I did that, several students did not log off. But then a couple of them look at the screen, and then they logged off.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes they are maybe afraid that if they stay, that they would be perceived as trying to be the teacher's pet or something like
Absolutely.
that.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think it needs to be really clear that the space is not just for procedural questions about the class, that this is a time for you as students to talk to each other as much as it is to talk to you, Professor Kwok, or you, Professor Benny. It's an important time for engagement with each other. And it's really interesting, as the classes have gone on, I've seen some of the faculty tell me they have to sort of wrap up the day because students keep wanting to stay and keep wanting to have questions, because that synchronous time, as much as we don't want to overburden students with synchronous live video time, it is a crucial component of their connection to each other when they're not physically in the building together. It's really important. And I would never force a student to be on video or audio, but for the students who are comfortable doing that, it's a really important part of their feeling a part of the seminary community, and not just with you as a faculty person, but amongst each other.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
That does bring up an interesting question. Are there any, I don't want to use the word, but I'm going to use it. Are there particular tricks that you use that would encourage students to turn on their camera in your experience?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I have some fun games I like to do. There's some tools in Zoom that are really fun where you can hide non-video participants. And if you roll over your screen, each individual window on your gallery view, there's an option to hide non-video participants. And so I like to do a sort of exercise where I say, all right, everybody turn off their video. And so there's nobody on the screen, and then say, turn on your video if you agree with Karl Barth on blank. And then the 4 people who agree with that video will pop up on the screen and they can start talking to each other. And then I say, all right, who agrees with Stanley Hauerwas on this? And then the Barth people turn off their camera and the 7 Hauerwas people turn on their camera. And so it becomes, you're not on all the time. It also becomes an invitation opt-in situation, right? Where it's you aren't being forced to turn it on, but it's an invitation to do so. And the fact that it feels a little bit like a game means that students get a little bit more engaged. And it doesn't have to be something as serious as, do you agree with Barthian theology? It can be something as silly as, turn on your screen if you have a cup of coffee next to you. You know, that can be an opening exercise too, as much as the scale of cats. And I learned that from a colleague of mine. It's a really fun exercise.
That's great. That's a good trick.
Yeah, and it's making use of Zoom, right? That's one of the things we need to remember. Like, Zoom is terrible for a lot of things, but we ought to use the tools it has to really allow for some engagement that wouldn't be possible aside from standing up physically in a regular room.
Now, how is this different from just they raise their hand if they agree with Barth, you know?
Yeah, so what happens is on the screen, when everybody chooses to hide non-video participants, every single person who's on the Zoom meeting is only seeing the people that turn on their screen. So for example, if I asked who agrees with Barth here and you both turned off your screens, everybody would only see me. So it's not just a raising hand, it's actually a visual. Only the people whose actual live video feeds are up are engaging, and it allows for a little bit of a fishbowl conversation too, which I've found to be super helpful in kind of engaging different sort of learning styles and different engagements in class, to have a smaller group do a conversation like that and have the sort of secondary people who are off video commenting in the chat. That allows for sort of a multi-layered conversation that also wouldn't be possible in a regular live physical classroom. It's really hard for the people on the outer ring of a fishbowl that comment without disrupting what's happening in the fishbowl. But here, you absolutely can carry on both those conversations at the same time. And it invites different layers of participation, which I think is really something the digital learning environment is inviting us to do. To think critically about the different ways students can engage and the different ways students are comfortable engaging. Some people hate being on video. Some students are really thriving with the text-based sort of back channel conversation that's happening in the class. And as much as we can, 1, cultivate that now, and 2, think about how we can do that when we're back in person is going to be really important.
I really like that, because that is not something that you do. It's so different from, starting earlier or staying longer. Actually, it's part of your teaching.
It is.
And yet at the same time, do something creative that will help them to get engaged. I think that's really excellent. Yeah.
Yep. And have you found that students are more willing to turn on their cameras if they're in the smaller group breakout rooms?
Yes, definitely.
So absolutely using the breakout rooms is going to be a really, an important component about making Zoom work. I don't know if you've seen, Zoom now has the option for choosing your own breakout room, which is another really great tool. So you say, all right, everybody who enjoyed this reading the most, go in this room. So it sort of allows students to select their small groups, not in a, oh, I see Pui Lan is in this room, I want to go hang out with her, but oh, this is the topic of that room. I am engaged in that topic. And I find that the agency of choice there is so valuable for getting students engaged in the content and the conversation and with each other. So the choose your own adventure is great.
Pui Lan was really nice. You sent me the link
yes.
to teach me how to do that, because I actually had difficulty doing the pre-assigned rooms.
The pre-assigned is horrible. Ugh.
Yeah, it never works, right? So at first I thought I would have the same group throughout the semester to help them build some kind of subgroup within the class. But it never worked. And then I asked Pui Lan, and then she sent me this opt-in yourself new feature. So that was really
it's
helpful.
Great. I'm super excited about it. And I think that'll make things a little bit more, have a little more skin in the game for students, because I can see how as a student, you're sitting in a class, you're just listening to someone talk. There's not really much incentive for you to engage. And as much as you can give students choices, I think they're going to be much more engaged themselves. It's just mine.
I also have a question. After these small group discussions, they come back, and then you might have one student who will be reporting. Sometimes the format is so rapid. And and then you cannot summarize a very rich conversation within 2 or 3 points, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How can you make it more lively?
Absolutely. So one of the things that there are a number of tools that will do this. And I just want to say at the outset, I am not the kind of person that wants to introduce tools just for the sake of tools. But if there is a tool that will allow you to do this, I would want you and your students to invest time in learning it. And I will say that collaborative documentation tools like a Google Doc or a Jamboard or a Padlet will allow for a couple things that are really, really great in small group discussions. The first is something like a Jamboard or a Padlet allows for visual engagement outside of just text. So you can add images, you can add links, you can do colors, you can do sticky notes. And I think the alternate modes of delivery and engagement is another great way for students to really build some community, right? So what they're doing is they're using a collaborative document, they're putting sticky notes of their conversation. Everyone is responsible for adding to these collaborative documents. It's not just the one note taker. So everybody in the group is adding things. And the cool part of it is you as the instructor can actually see them adding this content while you're in the main room and they're in the breakout room. So it's a way of seeing and checking in and making sure things are happening without being Big Brother in ways that really shut down conversations. Have you noticed when you as the faculty person go into the groups, they all of a sudden stop talking and look at you like you're supposed to lecture? This is a way of you sort of maintaining that conversation or seeing where that's going on without shutting down the conversation. And then once you're presenting, you have your student come back and they want to present. Instead of, saying, here's what we said A, here's what we said B, here's what we said to question 3, they show you this visual that they have created that allows for connections to be made so much more clearly and interestingly than just a bullet point list. So have either of you used like Jamboard or a Padlet or anything like that?
I'm embarrassed to say I've never heard of it.
Never? So exciting. All right, well, I can show you one right now. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay. Oh, Pui Lan, can you enable screen sharing?
Oh, yes, right.
And you'll recognize some of the pictures, the people on this one. This is some friends of ours. And again, Padlet and Jamboard are just 2 examples. You can use a number of different things. But here is a Padlet. So each of these little pieces are questions and answers that I created at different times. And to add something to the Padlet, all you have to do is double click. And it gives you the option here, I don't know if you can see it, to add a picture, to add a link, to search Google for something. You can give it a title. You can also add all kinds of other things, but I want to be clear here, under no circumstances is anyone required to do all of this, but you could use all of these if you wanted. At its bare minimum, it's a question or topic and answer system here. And once that's been posted, you can also have students reply to it. You can have students create connections from one side to the other. You can have students move things around. You can have them categorize. So all of this is just movable in a lot of different ways. And the cool part of this is if I give you a link to this, you both are able to see this Padlet. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat right now. You will be able to see that Padlet and you will be able to comment on it yourself. So what's cool about this is you can make a Padlet for each group where every person in your class could be working on one portion of the Padlet. And not only do you have this visual component, which feels different and interesting and non-Zoomy, right? We're all tired of just talking and looking at our faces in Zoom. This is a different way of visualizing what's going on. And you have the option of doing all of this yourself. And then you have a record of it, which is really, really exciting. What do you think about that?
Am I understanding correctly that you would post this on the chat line like a Google Doc?
Exactly.
And then people open it, they would be in Padlet, this
they would
particular
be in Padlet.
software.
Yep. And Padlet doesn't require anybody to be logged in. So it's not like Miro or some of the other tools that require that. So all they'd have to do is, my name shows up here as Bogue because I'm logged in, but you're not required to be logged in. So it allows for anonymity too, which is a really nice thing. So nobody feels like they're going to be graded necessarily on the quality of your content of what they've done here. And anybody can do this. They can just click on and type in. And then you have this wonderful record and you can put it in your Canvas site and people have a visual record of what the conversation was about, which I think is a lot of fun.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And Jamboard works the same way. I think the key here is not necessarily that you have to use a specific tool. It's thinking critically about multiple modes of delivery and discussion and engagement. And I think students are tired. They love the chat. I think a lot of people love the chat, but the chat is just the chat, right? It tiles up so quickly and you can't track who said what.
Yeah.
This allows for a little bit more organization and grouping and critical thinking in ways that I think will really stimulate community building in smaller groups. You could have a Padlet for a group over the course of a semester instead of a discussion board, right? This has all of the same components of a discussion board, but it's visual and it's different. I think that's what students are looking for. Some tiny, not something that's more work, not something that's another log on, but something that's just asks them to think about what they're reading and hearing in a slightly different way. Just giving that little bit of difference, I think can be a lot
Now you're
of fun.
sorry that you are doing this, Sarah. I'm going to email you to get more information.
Please do.
After we talked.
I was planning on sending you guys a handout that you could give to your group too that has a couple of options on here and the sort of relative pros and cons of using each one. Because please, again, hear me when I say we do not need more tools just because they're cool. But I do think this kind of collaborative tool allows and can be used in a variety of ways. Let me be clear. What's awesome about Padlet is that they have different templates. One of my colleagues here, Deanna Womack, had her students build collaboratively a timeline on Muslim-Christian engagement. And there's a timeline template here where students can add items on the timeline together. And then that becomes a project, right? So the Padlet as a tool can be a good breakout room tool. It can be a good replacement for a discussion board, but it can also be a place where students create semester-long projects. So I think if you're going to learn something new, it better be worth the time because nobody has time right now. And I do think something like a Padlet or a Jamboard, and you wouldn't have to use it each week, but something like that is just that little spark of engagement that I think students feel a little bit more compelled on. And it feels like a slightly different space than a Zoom or a Canvas discussion board, which we're all tired of too. Believe me, I know.
Pui Lan, have you done this?
No, I have not. And besides this,
That makes me feel better.
yes. And besides this, what are some of the things that you might want to introduce to our audience?
So I think the other piece that can be really useful in terms of engagement in live class sessions are using polling tools, right? There's a poll inside of Canvas, which is fine. Emory just purchased enterprise level access to Poll Everywhere, which is a really nice tool. And the good things about that tool, rather than an internal to Zoom poll, is that students can participate on their phones while they're in Zoom, right? So it's something they could be doing and not lose the whole screen of Zoom. Sometimes a tool like Padlet takes you away from Zoom and that becomes a little bit distracting. But open-ended questions that you want to see sort of a visualization of instead of just dropping it in the chat. Poll Everywhere can create a word cloud of the things that you've just created. It can show it live in real time. And that can be, again, none of these are tools that are required, but having that slight bit of visualization helps students think about their responses, I think, in a little bit different way. So if you ask a question about, eschatology and what that means on the ground, and you see all these questions about theodicy coming up, like what is evil, what is good, you can sort of see where students are going and guide a discussion in ways that feels more organic and student driven. So it's not just you, faculty person, saying, well, I think this is where the discussion can go. It's students guiding it, but in a way that doesn't take up 20 minutes of sort of conversation that rambles left and right and up and down. It allows for a frame that I think is really, really, really helpful in the online space. That means you can have a 15-minute really focused conversation based on that poll data, rather than sending people to a breakout room for 30 minutes and then coming back and having 20 minutes of reports and then 5 minutes where you as the faculty person can actually sum it up in a way that sort of gets towards your learning objectives for that day. So I think if you can find tools that allow for more student engagement, not less, but then frame that student engagement in a way that you as a faculty person can use it pedagogically, this is a win-win, win-win-win.
Yeah,
so,
I see.
All everywhere.
Yes, that is make it not monotonous. Include all these things.
Yep.
That, they may find it helpful for learning and also,
yep.
And then also, I think that the most important thing, of course, is student engagement.
Yes.
Not just listening you to give a PowerPoint presentation.
No.
5 minutes. Everybody will be so tired.
So bored. Yes. And I think too, we've talked about a lot of high tech sort of things. One of my favorite things to do in a Zoom classroom is to give everybody 5 minutes to write something on a piece of paper. So I say, here's a prompt, write about it, right? It's a way of taking them out of the Zoomy space, reminding them that they're three-dimensional, that they have hands and fingers and they are writing. And that allows students just space to process. I think one of the things that comes really naturally in the in-person space is giving people time to process. Quiet time in a Zoom room makes people really anxious. It makes me really anxious as a faculty person. But we have to remember students are processing things at the same speed they did before. Just because we're in Zoom and Twitter world doesn't mean everyone is processing. So giving intentional space by individuals, right? The think, pair, share that we all love to do. We've completely forgotten about the think bit. We just jump immediately into the group space and are like, go talk about this. We never give individuals the opportunity to process. And I think that will help students feel a little bit more engaged too, that they have time to think, because we're squeezing so much into Zoom, y'all. We're squeezing so much because we don't want to spend 3 hours in Zoom. We really want the hour to last. But as that's happening, we still need to give space for students to process and to engage and know that everybody isn't thinking a million miles a minute like I am.
When I asked the question about office hour, you
Yep.
talked about how it's a time for students to hang out together. It's not just with me.
Yep.
So can you say a little bit about how you help them to build community outside of the class time and without you?
Yes,
without
absolutely.
your participation?
Yes. So a couple things. One is during the first couple of weeks of class, I really encourage students to have a back channel discussion space, a WeChat, a Facebook chat, a group me that is completely outside of me. And what's really surprising to me is how many of our students were already doing that, and I just didn't know about it, even when I was in-person classes. So naming that you want them to do that, and you encourage them to do that without your oversight is often enough of an invitation for them to do that. The other thing that I found really helpful, and my colleague Liz Bounds here has done this, that's really surprising to me, that it's worked, not that it's worked so well, but that students really love it, is assigning these group work, but that asks students to talk to each other about the things that they're reading. in unstructured, whenever they feel like talking time. So she gives them a template of 5 or 6 questions that they need to ask each other. And the only requirement for them to get credit for this is to post in an assignment that only she sees, just a quick summary of what they talked about, 100 words. But she structures it so that there is some question and answer time, but then she pairs students up, and it's up to them to have the conversation. It's up to them to report on the conversation. So it's only semi-structured, but it invites this community engagement outside of the live class time. And it has been such a huge success. These classes are mostly about ethics and community building. So she had that sort of skill building as part of what she wanted in her learning goals, but really giving points, incentivizing, gives students credit for talking to each other outside of class around class topics. And she actually used this as asynchronous content time too. So she used this as part of her structure of her contact hours to say, I am trusting you to spend this time together and reporting on it. And that's part of the process of this class. So decentralizing the class to an extreme. She only met in person. She only met live for an hour a week, and then had these 2 or 3 other hours that students were working together outside of class, incentivized by an assignment, but not in a like, oh, you did this well or you did this poorly. Did you do it? And so it really, I think, giving assignments that are specifically about community building is a really, really great way of really naming for students that you think that's an important component of your class.
Did I catch you correctly that when you talked about this exercise, you said not that it worked that well?
Oh no, it worked really well.
Oh, I thought you said, maybe I misheard you then.
No,
Yeah.
I think I was surprised it worked so well because
Okay.
she made these pairings without knowing and who they were, and she had these groups set up for the entire semester. So I think it would be interesting to think about how, if you rotated those groups, what it would be like, and if it wasn't on a paired level. The fact that it was a pair made for these really deep bonds. But I know a lot of our other faculty have created sort of buddy systems, is the really negative, childish way of saying it. But how we need buddies right now. We need accountability partners. We need people who are going to be invested in our well-being. And I think if you can make that a part of your class plan, all the better for everybody.
I think students actually long for that. I'm so encouraged to hear that you said they actually are already doing it themselves. Yeah.
And I do. And Pui Lan, I don't know if your students have done this too, but I know you've done a lot of productive group work as a way of really not forcing, but inviting them to be in collaboration outside of class.
Yes, I have done some of that too. That is, unless the students are engaged, I always think that there is very little way of gauging whether they are really interested in the stuff.
Yes.
And so I think the students' active involvement is really the key of the success of any class.
Absolutely.
So invite participation by trying to see what are the talents in the class.
Yes.
There are people who can sing, and then so I would have the opening of the class by volunteers. So they do a video or they lead a song or whatever. And that also works very well too.
Yes.
They have different ways of contributing to the class.
Absolutely. And the more routes we have for that, and the more ways we can actually give class credit for it. I think one of the sad parts about that is that faculty see it as sort of a nice add-on rather than a core component of what the class is. So saying, I have an assignment in one of my classes where they write a research paper and then they also do a creative translation of that into whatever format they want. So some people have done Twitter campaigns, some people have done paintings. I had someone doing a liturgical dance. There was no requirement for what that creativity was like, but I made space for it and asked everyone to do it. And what was really exciting, I've done this about 4 years now. What's really exciting to me about that is the way students are energized by seeing exactly what you're saying, Pui Lan, what each other are good at and what each other are interested in. It's just when I have students present this part of their project, it is the most engaged I have ever seen a class. They're so excited and excited for each other. It's amazing. So I think building in those multiple kinds of engagement with the material and making space for students to share it with each other. How rich is that? You think about how many classes you have people work on these long projects and their colleagues never see it. It's so sad. Like, you get to benefit from it as the faculty person, but having students see each other's work is really energizing too. So I think peer review sounds like a really boring negative thing, but I think is also a really great way of community building by helping students see what each other are interested in and working on, and building that sort of capacity for critical engagement with someone else's work. That's a need everyone has in a world such as ours, to be able to say, to point out, here's something that works, here's something that doesn't work. Let's dialogue on how we could maybe make it better. So I think that making a peer review component to smaller parts of projects or even big projects has also been a really nice way for students to build community that I've seen. And it does, yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious, Sarah. So for that particular assignment, did you just grade the papers, or did you also grade the secondary format that they perform?
Yes, that's a great question. I graded both of them. The rubric for the paper was very, very detailed. And the grading rubric for the creative piece was very not detailed. It was extremely high level. It was, do I see a connection between this creative piece and your research paper? Have you explained how that works? So it was kind of gimme points. I'm going to be honest. It's kind of gimme points, but even if I was going to grade them on a scale, on an actual like hardcore scale, they all would have gotten A's anyway, because their creativity was actually where the rubber met the road for them. They were excited about it. I mean, some of them put together one girl put together an entire conference. Like, she created a conference plan and put together a keynote talk for this thing that was only 15% of her grade, because it's something she wants to do, right? And she took that and is going to use it. I think that's the piece that will really have people dig into, is giving assignments that have something to do with their lives, right? You can take, the components of an exegesis paper, great. We all care about historiography and things like that, but you can achieve those learning goals with a Twitter campaign and an exegesis paper, right? The key is having a rubric that's flexible enough, as you're pointing to really gauge that. And that's why I always pair sort of a traditional academic with a more creative analysis, so that I feel comfortable with my learning goals having been met, as well as their professional development needs and creativity needs having been met. But the key there is sharing it with the other students, because that's where the real energy comes from.
And did you devote like one last class session or more than one class session for that to take place?
Two, depending on the size of the class.
Right.
Last year it was so big I had to take 3 classes, but that's okay. It was worth it, because people they got so excited.
Yeah, and less work for us.
Yes, hey, there you go. Listen, there's nothing quite like, teach them to teach, and then you're out of a job.
So it sounds like that, Sarah, we really soon think that Zoom teaching is just translating what we have been doing in the classroom to this context. We really need to think this is a new modality and learn new skills to make this work.
Absolutely. And be gentle with ourselves. As much as we are gentle with students, this is a huge learning curve, and really digging into the parts of pedagogy that are your strength. As you talked about, students have different strengths. What are your strengths as an instructor, and how can the digital tools support that? There's no need for everybody to be doing Padlets. There's no need for everybody to be recording crazy, intense videos, right? What are your strengths, and how can the digital tools support that and make space for you to reach your students? That's really all that this is about.
Can I ask you, what do you do with, we all try our best and we have the best intentions, I think. But once in a while, despite how talented we are and how creative we may be, there could be a student who really is aloof and disengaged. So since we're talking about community, what do you do with when such a student happen to be in your class?
That's a really great question. I think one of the things that has helped me in those scenarios is reaching out individually to that student, because in a lot of cases, the aloofness and the disengagement are symptoms of larger problems and what's going on in the student's life, rather than something to do specifically with my class. So one thing I would encourage everybody to do at whatever institution you're at is to be aware of the support routes that are there for students who are struggling, and know those and refer. It is not your job to be a therapist, even though a lot of us get in that space. It's not your job to be a financial aid counselor. Although, again, I've had these conversations with students that I hang up from and I think, oh my gosh, I should not have been doing that. The financial aid people should be doing that. So really making a clear effort to find out what's going on with the student, and if possible, refer them to a support route that will help them get the support that they need, whether that's writing center, whether that's financial aid, whether that's mental health counseling, whether or not that's the registrar to say the student needs to drop the class. And at Candler, thankfully, we have a whole group of people whose job it is to work on student academic success. And we have a system to alert them of students we feel are disengaged in a variety of ways. So if your institution doesn't have something like that, I think COVID has given us even more opportunity to say to the powers that be, there need to be structures in place to support our students. And we as faculty need to be able to access those and not take all that burden on ourselves. So I think the first is reach out to the student, find out what's going on. If it's truly just a disengagement piece, pray over them and let it go. I think that's the hardest part of this, is to realize we can't set higher standards for the digital space than we set for the in-person space, right? We can't assume everyone's going to be engaged on Zoom when they weren't all engaged in person, right? We have this weird rose-colored glasses now looking back at the in-person space and say, oh, it was perfect. Everyone was there. Everyone was engaged. That's not true. There were people that were disengaged in person too, and allowing yourself permission to say, I've done what I can with this one student. I've reached out, I've connected them to support. That's all that there's going to have to be for this particular student right now. But definitely know your own boundaries there, and knowing what routes for support are really crucial for our own mental health as faculty people at this time. And I think the tendency for those of us who are really invested in students is to do more there. And I would just say, caution, do a little bit less, but know who's out there who can do more.
Because of time, do you have final advice or hints for the team?
I think just being gentle with yourself and picking a couple things to invest in, right? You don't need to become a video editor. You don't need to become an expert at social media, but find one or two things that you think are going to possibly make a difference to your class now, and most importantly, to your class once COVID is over. Invest in those tools so that they can still reap benefits once you're back in person.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Cool.
That's really great. I'm going to email you and learn about
Please
the Padlet or whatever that is called.
Yeah. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.